guys, this is Frederick. Thanks for joining us today. We're thrilled that you're here and thankful for your time. And we're excited to show you our platform, APIANT, which is an API integration and automation platform. And we believe it's the most powerful iPaaS there is on the cloud today. So what I wanted to do is maybe start by giving you kind of a quick, 5-6 minute background on the application, how we go about building automations, at least for our customers, before we dive into, AIP and the assembly editor, which is really where Robert is going to take over. We started APIANT with one fundamental philosophy, which is, there's really no reason why we should say no to people who want to integrate their apps if the apps are able to do it. So how does it work? Really, again, this is going to take just a few seconds to go through. Very much like other tools you've seen, which is when something happens, then something happens, right? So it's your typical automation, starts with a trigger or more than one. And a trigger, essentially, if it passed muster or if it actually is being triggered, it runs a routine of action. So we all know how that works. Now, what's interesting to hear is something that a lot of our customers forget, is that often action can pass data to other actions. So in this case, if Shopify does a new order, then we create an invoice in QuickBooks, and then we go to Salesforce right after that and create a task. Now, that task could include information from that Shopify order and potentially also the QuickBooks invoice number. And then we send a message to the sales manager and we say, hey, look, we just sold them something on Shopify. The invoice number is X, and it's for this company, and their history, purchasing history is Y. And all of that would go into Slack or Gmail or SMS. Now, where we differentiate ourselves, where we really feel we are so different than everybody else, is that now you can actually dive behind each one of those endpoints and look at the API integration at the programmatic level of that API, of that endpoint. So we could go behind that new order integration of QuickBooks here, and in the assembly editor, you can actually look at how that was implemented, and you can start modifying and customizing that. So potentially, you could just take the new order from Shopify and duplicate it and call it, new large order or whatever it is for your own purpose, and then start putting in some logic on the assembly editor and start creating your own endpoints. Or you could use an endpoint that has already been created for one app and potentially use that as a starting point for a new app if it's very similar. If it's authorized, if it does credentials through OAuth or through something else, maybe that's a really good starting point for you. And then what we do is that we use, for most of our customers, through our integrators or ourselves, and hopefully you guys, what we do is we build these integrations for them. So we're able to go in there and through a project portal, let them log in and then keep track of their full integration and the progress of it and the impact of their new request on the total budget and everything else. So our approach, our marketing approach has been, again, back to what I was saying earlier, which is, well, look, why don't we just try to find out what the customer wants first before we build it? We have 15,000 apps in our catalog here, and for each app, some endpoints may be implemented and some may not be. So if I came to HubSpot here, I can look at HubSpot and I can see that I have 2 triggers and 2 actions implemented, but we have more triggers and more. Let me just clear this out here on this empty card. So we have more triggers and more actions that are available to implement, and even for a lot of these cases where people don't even know if something exists or if something is possible, they may come here and say, HubSpot, I want a new donut. I don't know. And they say, hey, I wonder if this is possible. So they add this to their cart, they submit it, and then through our ordering process, at that point, we can start a conversation with the customer and say, well, HubSpot doesn't really do donuts, but we could do other things. Or we could say, yeah, that's actually possible. That's kind of like a combination of about 3 endpoints together. We can build you a custom endpoint for that, a trigger or an action. And so that's how we go about doing integrations for people, and back to our philosophy, which is let them tell us what they want. And then with our tool, we can do it. So let me just dive real quick into the automation editor first, and then I'll do a 30-second intro to the assembly editor, and then I'm going to turn it over to the Wizard of Atlanta, also known as Robert Yeager. So here, I'll just create an automation. If I came here and I said, okay, in Agile CRM, right, I want to do a new contact in Agile CRM. It fetches the data field from Agile, and you can add any filter to that trigger. So I can say, okay, I want okay, first name. I just want to trigger this action for every new contact in Agile whose first name is Fred, right? And then, of course, you can do your actions. So I want to know every Fred, because my name is Fred, and I want to tell them, hey, you know what, guys, we have the same name. That's pretty cool. And then here in the Gmail, the recipient, I'm going to put myself here as a recipient. And then the subject, another Fred in Agile. And then here in the body, I can start mapping these fields, and I can search here. So what is the first name? Well, we know the first name. Fred's last name is, and then we're going to say last. Okay, so you get the gist and how simple that is to use. I can add an attachment or whatever that is. So now I've just created an automation. When there's a new Fred in Agile, send me an email and tell me about it, and tell me their last name, right? So that's cool, but a lot of people can do that. As you know, we're not the only ones who can do this. This is where we are different. So here, I'll take a look at this new contact trigger here. Now take a look at this. Now I'm going to go to Assembly Editor. And so the Assembly Editor is really where you're going to build most of these endpoints, where you're going to copy them, build them, customize them, and build your integrations. And the Assembly Editor, again, I'm going to do a 30-second intro here, and then Robert will take over. The Assembly Editor is basically comprised of two things: modules and assemblies. Modules are specific pieces of code snippets that perform a particular action in an API integration situation. We have about 150 plus modules. So what is a module? So I'll give you an example. OAuth here. We have a module called the OAuth Authentication 2.0, right? So what is this? Essentially, this is a module that when you want to do OAuth in your integration, you just use this module. Now, behind the module, you can actually look at a lot of things. You can look at the UI of the module, and you can modify that. You can create your own modules. And then I'll skip all of this here, but you can essentially look at the code behind the module. So this is the code that module is essentially going to be executing, which is the OAuth 2.0 here. Now, when modules are assembled together, they make assemblies. And what is an assembly? Well, an assembly is essentially, implementing an app or making a trigger or an action. So let's go back to that example here that we were looking at. New contact in Agile. What does it look like on the assembly level? I am the worst looker. Oh, here's Agile. All right, so let's take a look at Agile, and then we'll look at the trigger new contact. So here it is. So I'm going to open that assembly, and essentially these are all modules assembled together to perform the task of the trigger new contact. And you can see that a lot of these assemblies are not very complicated. I mean, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 modules assembled together that perform the new contact trigger. Okay, this is as far as I'll go, and this is essentially as far as I go when I demonstrate that to a customer. I'll say to them, look, I'm just going to show you this assembly editor, not because I expect you to go into it, but I just want you to feel comfortable that you can ask us just about anything, and we can implement it really quickly for you, because we're able to use this very innovative platform called APIANT with the assembly editor. And I'll stop here. Robert, do you want to share your screen and take over?
Let me start with a web service. So besides integrating with APIs, you can actually sort of create API endpoints in this editor itself. What I like to show is Flickr, because I have examples here. Flickr web service. So a web service is basically a URL endpoint that can be invoked on the server that will spit out a response. We have modules for spitting out an XML response and a JSON response, and also even a CSV response. So the important thing is, all it takes to have a web service is this module, and the system will recognize it as being such. So what this service is doing is it's taking a URL query parameter as identified by this parameter module called tags, and it's doing a Flickr search based on that. And this is a subassembly, and what this is a nested wiring diagram. So this, subassemblies prevent, basically spaghetti diagrams. You don't want your logic to get too big. So this is a reusable modular capability, and as this shows, this module is accepting a parameter called tags, which is what's appearing here in this module's input. So that's where that comes from. These parameter modules are inputs to things. And what this is doing is it's actually another nested subassembly within this one that actually formats the URL. This is just for a demonstration purpose, just to show you that subassemblies can be nested, they can have parameters, so they're reusable components. So what this one's doing is actually making the API called a Flickr. So when I run this thing, actually it's going to open a new browser window, and it's going to format the URL and make the API call. So these are the parameters. It's identifying which web service to invoke, which account to use. And what I can do, just to show you, is I can put the tags parameter on the URL, like monument. And the API call is made, and you can see here, that was successful. So Flickr's returning monument photos now. So very quickly, we just demonstrated, a capability to build API endpoints in the system where the logic is free-form, flexible, whatever you need it to do. You can also do URL like post parameters. There's a module for that. You can send a post payload, parse it out, and manipulate it, and invoke APIs. Another thing I want to show you in terms of modularity is that pretty much everything you build can be used as a module itself. So right now that capability is not totally fleshed out, but I'm trying to think of a good example here. I don't want to get trapped.
So like assemblies as models or as modules?
Yeah, so like what I'm showing you is an action as a module. So here is a module that, an action for 500px, which uploads a photo from a URL. That normally appears over here, like right here, where it could be used in automations. But what I'm showing you is that I can actually use that within a web service. Where was I? Am I in the right place? Yeah. So back to here. So I drag that thing out. So what I can do is just use that action as another reusable component in other things, in this case being a web service. Okay?
Then how do you access, once you build it here, how do you access it from setting it up to press play?
Well, because it's going back to here, I mean the web service itself is exposable as just a URL. So all you have to do is be able to invoke the URL and pass the parameters that web service needs, basically.
And we could do that. So I could take that URL, copy it, put it into the trigger action sequence. Basically, I'm thinking if I set this up for a client, right, and then want them to be able to see the different things that they have going on, and by that I mean back to the Citizen Integrator screen where you have the trigger and action. One of those actions could be submit data to this URL.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's one option.
And Robert, could you, a quick question for you, this is Frederick. You showed how you could actually drop an action into an assembly. So you can essentially drop actions into actions, not just web services?
You can drop, yes. It is possible. There's a little bit of complexity with that in terms of the user's accounts, because what happens is that the automation editor is not aware if you have, I call them like a composite action, where an action is assumed to have one API endpoint, like this 500px action is assumed by the automation editor to just need one account to do its work. If I start dropping in other actions, those actions rely upon other API accounts to be connected. And the system does not yet investigate an action to figure out how many accounts are needed. So it's up to us, to communicate to the user, hey, you need to also go connect another account to be able to use this action, basically, because the system doesn't yet have that smarts.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of a good one here. Okay.
Well, I mean, one is, like we were talking. A perfect example would be. I'm sorry. A perfect example would be like, if you created a custom action, for instance, in a CRM, Salesforce, and you wanted that action to be smart enough to grab data from Crunchbase or LinkedIn. So when you say, look, when we get a new inquiry, create the account into Salesforce, but while you create the account to Salesforce, go grab some data from Crunchbase and LinkedIn and whatever else. All those LinkedIn and Crunchbase actions could actually be embedded into that Salesforce action, but they would have to have credentials already given for these other two apps, essentially.
That's what I'm saying, because when you're building automation over here, if I go to 500px and try to build that, it's going to know I need to connect an account, but it's not smart enough to query the action and figure out all the accounts that need to be connected. I'm going to cancel that real quick.
But if it's a custom action you're building for a client, you can communicate to them that when you use this, make sure you're logged in your Crunchbase, your LinkedIn, and your Salesforce.
Yes.
So in that concept, it sounds like you can only have one authenticated account per APIANT user.
No, the system allows to have multiple accounts.
How would you determine?
Right here, I'm going to show you. Right now I have it turned off because it makes a lot of noise. But if you click that option here for the showing of these service accounts, now you see that it shows which account to use. If it's empty, there's a default account and it's named default. So if it's empty, it uses the default connected account for that app. And over here in the, back here, you can manage your connected accounts. Let me think. Let me go to this one. So if I click here, you'll see all the connected accounts. You can connect another account. So this is your account management for each app.
You set the default based on that. Yeah. Okay, cool.
The first one is called default. Yeah. Okay. So that's how that works. So as I'm showing you here, here's a 500px action that I've embedded another action for Agile CRM. And you can keep doing that. Now, the trick is for these actions, there's some limitations in the system's ability to show the parameters. Like for this one, I picked one where they're just banged out by hand in this action module. So it can show these, it can show other types of parameters, but what it can't do yet is show dynamically fetched fields, like for like custom fields or a spreadsheet. Like in the case of Google, like a spreadsheet, EFG, Google Sheets. So like in a spreadsheet, you don't know how many columns there are until you go fetch them. So here's an action module that has a nested subassembly to go fetch the worksheet columns. So in this case, I can't use that Google action as an embeddable module like I did, where was I? Like I did here, because it won't fetch those entities, those columns. So there's some limitations with this capability, but in the cases where you can do it, you can chain your logic in this manner for using other actions in a single outer action, if you will. the system is sort of self-documenting in the sense that all of these modules, if you look down here on the left, you see help. All the modules have sample assemblies. And you can click on these help icons to show the help for each module and its functionality. Okay.
Yeah.
So the system has information. You just need to know where to go look. Another thing about these modules is that they have tons of information if you just mouse over a field. See these tooltips?
Got it.
So there's tons of information. Notice that some modules have more settings. So you can click and see more options for the modules. So one thing about the workings of this editor is that there's no spaghetti code in the sense of there's no wires that have circular logic. It's all flowing top down from one module to another. Another is that you're actually working with the data itself live as you build these modules and connect them together. So this first module here is going to emit an XML document, and they're called data streams. So each wire can have multiple XML documents, and we call those data streams. So this one is going to emit a single XML document from this module. When I double click it, I can double click it to run. I can click it once and get some options here to run it, or I can run the assembly at the top right from the execute link. So if I double click, it's just going to run the diagram to that point in the flow. So I ran it, and that first module executed. Now what appears here is this magnifying glass icon, which opens the stream inspector. You can also see a preview of the data here. So if I click that, I'm seeing the XML document emitted from that module. So again, because there's no circular logic, the way looping is done is by nesting. So what happened here is that when I drag this module out, it initially has no nested item. But what I can do is I can drop compatible modules into here, and that includes subassemblies. So you can imagine, very sophisticated logic being, loopable in the sense of being able to have subassemblies that do lots and lots of logic. So that's iterated over data rows. So what this one's going to do is just do some text building. So what happens is with this nesting capability for loops, the default text builder just knows how to take text and concatenate it together. So if I do that and run it, the output from this is going to be AB. And again, you can see it over here at the bottom left. So this module by itself doesn't know it's going to be dropped into a loop. And when it is, its UI changes a little bit. And you can see here that now it's expecting really to have data paths within the looped XML data to process. And what it's saying here is when you want to work with literal text values, just precede it with a $sign here. So that's just indicating to the system's logic for the loop that that's going to be treated as a text field, whereas this first one's going to be treated like an XML XPath. So what's going to happen here is when I run this, every item is going to be appended with this append text. So I'm going to run that, and you can see at the bottom left, it took the value and appended the text to it. And then I assign that result to the node itself. I can optionally create a new data stream from it, which is another XML document. So now it's emitting two XML documents, two data streams, and the second one has a separate loop result. Okay.
And
so again,
we're used to working in JSON. Is that something we can go and same concept applies, I assume?
Well, there's no effective XPath mechanism for JSON that's really
right.
performance.
No XPath, that's true.
So when you're working with data in this editor, you're working with XML. When APIs return JSON, it gets automatically converted into XML, so it could be worked with in the editor.
Is there a module to translate JSON into XML? Like, meaning if we go create, or say it's not from an API, say it's from something else, is there anything to translate it modularly?
From XML into JSON?
Other way around, from JSON into XML.
From JSON. Well, right now, right now, when you fetch the data from the like the HTTP transaction or the OAuth transaction, if the response is JSON, it will be converted. So what you could do is fetch it through those modules to get it translated. Okay.
Cool.
And then I was going to show you that we do have a JSON builder because lots of APIs expect to receive JSON. So this module knows how to format it. So you can plop in XML into it as input and then pick out parameters and map it into different JSON fields, which is suitable for very simplistic, JSON. Sometimes it gets too complex and you actually need to do it through code. But this module is good for when it's really short and sweet. Okay. And again, I mean, with so many modules, I really can't take the time to show you the ins and outs of, how they work. What I can show you is that, you get help information by clicking the help icon, and you see here at the lower left. Another good way is to see where they're used. And this is the best way of all, I think, is you right click on these items in the catalog and you do something like find all assemblies using that module. And that module is being used in 71 different places that you can go take a peek and see, how it's being used. And that's why I usually, see as the best way is, to find out how a module is really used. Okay.
That makes sense. Yep.
Okay.
I was going to say to Fred, ask a question about if we're interested in seeing you build a simple trigger or action from scratch to show the process. The answer is that'd be cool if it's something that you could do in the remaining time, or even just start it in the remaining time.
Well, I mean, it really gets repetitive because there's really nothing different. I guess the best thing for me to do at this point, I mean, I'm sort of torn because there's lots of editor tricks to make building these diagrams more effective. There's lots of functionality hidden in right-click context menus. You can make space for logic by, hold on. Lots of times you need to insert new logic in between modules, so you can select a chain. It's easier shown with a bigger module, a bigger diagram. Let's do this one. I can add logic by selecting everything below it, dragging that stuff down to insert space.
Right.
You can copy paste items from diagram to diagram. Sometimes you need to disable logic. You can, if I can get my right clicking working, you can turn module execution on and off in order to troubleshoot certain logic sections of your diagrams if you need to. Another thing you do is your right click.
Can you show us how to do it?
Well, let's look here. I mean, it's kind of hard without an example, but what I would do, you can turn off all, I turn off all of them, and then I go right click on the ones I want to enable. If I just want to watch that one and maybe the top one. And then when I run the
what did you click to turn it off?
I'm right clicking on the background of the module and I'm turning on and off its execution. So what I have now are two modules that are enabled to run and all the rest are turned off. And this works in terms of you can save the diagram in this state, and when the automation or when this assembly is executed on the server, the turned off modules just won't execute. Okay. So if you have trouble or if you just want to have logic that needs to be turned off, you can do it in that manner.
And you're doing a right click and just literally just clicking and it will turn off.
Yeah, lots of right clicks here. That's the main point of what I'm trying to show you. I'm doing right clicking. I'm right click here, turn that one on. Okay.
Got it. Cool.
Got it. Okay. Let me show you the different patterns we have for connecting APIs. I mean, I know you guys know the basics of API connections in terms of, some of our endpoints don't need any credentials at all. Let me show you how that's done real quick. Something like a CNBC newsfeed. The general pattern is when you look at these apps in the catalog, the top level item is the assembly that gathers the credentials needed to access the API that will be used from the triggers and actions. So in the case of, the easiest case is when there's none. So like for CNBC's trigger, you can just fetch the RSS feed by itself without having a username, password, or anything. So there's this module that indicates, that service just doesn't need any credentials. And what happens is over here, you can see that these are enabled, and that's because, you don't need to do anything to use them. The next hardest scenario is when you have like an API key. So 123 contact form uses that. So the way you do that is this module presents a UI control, a window for having the end user input that information. And what we're doing here in this assembly, all of these service assemblies need to validate the credentials before really saving them into the database to make sure that they're actually usable and correct. So what this one is going to do is going to request the API key from the end user through a dialog window. It's going to authenticate and validate that credential through the API. Then it's going to check and do a check for an error condition from the API. And if no error is received, it's going to save that credential into the database where it could be pulled out and referenced from the triggers and actions. So let me run this, and we're going to see an error here because I'm going to give it a bad value. So this form is formatted from all these provided settings. Junk. There's the error that I was expecting. So that error is happening down below here because it caught the criteria. And the way I figured that out is just from trial and error, basically, of figuring out how the API responds to an invalid API key. If I look here at the raw API response, this is how they do it. So all I have to do is just look for that error message, which is being done here. I actually just checked to see if any error exists. And if so, this is my formatted message that the end user sees. So here you can see, I have shown you this, I've taken that wire and I split it out into two documents. So this module is looking at the same document that this one is. And then here's the thing I haven't shown you yet, is that I'm taking a data value from that document by connecting it. So what happens is you get that option when you connect the wire. So the system knows from, these nodes have types. If I mouse over, you see that input node expects an XML document. So when I connect an XML document to it, it knows it's a valid connection and we're good to go. This field does not expect an XML document. It expects a text value. So I get this option here to select a value from that data stream. So I selected, what value I want to have right there. And then you can see that little label appears that I can move around if I need to make the diagram prettier.
So it's basically picking a value from the XML to put into that text.
Well, it seems really helpful that it's saying this is the wrong data type right up front.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, is the basically the idea here where you go and create trigger? This is a trigger. Well, whatever it might be. Is this in the authentication for each app that you do this, where they've done the authentication and done it, or do you have to do this for each trigger or action? Oh, I see. So when I look at, okay, got it. That's the connection piece.
Right. So looking here, I opened up, underneath, that's the first thing you see is I call these service assemblies. It's basically the piece that, authenticates and connects the account.
And that's what gets displayed on the,
so if I connect an account here we go, this is the flow. And again, same thing will happen when I enter junk. Okay.
Right.
So that's the assembly that's running when you connect accounts over here, is this, okay?
Right.
So that's...
Before you close that, real quick.
I can't escape it.
You did. I wanted to show them the little API key jagged. Explain that join function. That's really cool.
Yeah, this helps prevent spaghetti diagrams. Like this wire needs to be used down below where I'm saving, this module is saving that API key into the database. So I need to get the value of the API key down here where it can be saved. So what I did, one way, let me delete that. Looking at it, one way is just drag the wire all the way down below and connect it. And that's not very pretty, right? So what we have are, this wire connector here. And this section is, my commonly used modules and things. And all you have to do is just take these things and drag them out of the catalog and plop them here. Okay, down below, so they're more quickly accessible.
So customizable per user.
Yeah. It's your own custom pick list. So if I take that wire connector out, right now it's in 2 pieces. And all it lets you do is just string wires from one part of the diagram to another. So I'm going to, or junk. So I'll take that API key, and then I hit enter, unjoin it. And then instead of the wire, I can just take that part. I don't have, my finger's not long enough. And then I'll plop it here and connect it here. Okay, so that's how you avoid spaghetti wires going everywhere in your diagrams.
Which module is that on the quick picks?
It's called wire connector.
Ah, okay, got it.
And it's up here at the top of the catalog of these modules because it's so useful. Another one you'll use, to document your diagrams. You can have URL links to documentation. You can add notes, plop those in.
Yeah, and Robert, why don't you show them where they can ask questions, essentially, the easiest way.
Sure,
there's a little support tab there. Because also, sometimes Robert can answer a quick question for you. Oh, just right click, On the bottom left,
there's a tab at the bottom for the support.
All right. Well, I guess that concludes our little demo. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert, very much, and thank you all of you guys.